What's up, girls? I just read Behave by Robert Sapolsky. It's a 2017 non-fiction book about behavior, and Robert Sapolsky is a Stanford neurobiologist and primatologist. The book is organized in a very cool way. The first half of the book, I believe it's 18 chapters. The first 9 chapters start at a theoretical event and move backwards. So it's organized like the moment it happens, the second before it happens, an hour before it happens, months before it happens, years before it happens, blah, blah, blah. And the point of the book being organized in this way is to show how genetics, environment, cultural influence, lifestyle habits all influence your behavior. And ultimately the book somewhat makes a case against free will, or at least likes to say that, if the prevalent culture is affecting someone in a certain way, if their socioeconomic status is affecting them in a certain way, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, we have all of these stacked probabilities. We can pretty accurately predict what's going to happen to them or how they're going to react in a situation. Not to say that people can't defy the odds, but anyway, the book is full of cool, interesting quips, for example, and like a million studies. It's incredibly dense. I listened to it on Audible. It was about a 20-hour listen. It has little things like, if there's first class on a flight, then there's something like 4 times greater odds that there'll be a fight in coach, and 8 times greater odds if the coach passengers have to board the plane and walk through the first class cabin on their way to coach. Really, really hilarious sociological and psychological studies like that. It discusses every prevalent political topic that seem to be central talking points of a lot of political debate today. Discusses racism. There's a famous study that it references that if you flash a person who is of another race than you for 1/1000th of a second, I believe, the amygdala will activate, giving you a violent reaction, versus if you're able to see the image for longer, the reasoning part of your brain can reason away prejudice or bias, and different people's brains react differently to that. Ton of super fascinating stuff. He takes a pretty leftist academic stance on basically everything. He makes an argument against prison, basically, and that most violent crimes are the result of I don't know what the politically correct word would be, but insanity or improper brain functioning, and that most people should be in insane asylums rather than prisons. He argues against free will. He references a ton of academic problems, or popular academic questions, like the trolley problem is in there. Trolley problem being how likely someone is to pull a lever to divert a train from running over 5 people towards a track that will run over 1 person. And then it, adds in a bunch of variables. What if the person is a family member of yours? What if you have to physically push the 1 person in front of the train in order to save the 5 on the track, et cetera, et cetera? People are less likely to do anything that they have to actually physically push someone with. They're more likely to divert the train towards the 1 person if it just is the result of pushing a button or a lever. meaning like the more detached you are, the more likely you are to make the more logical solution. He talks about, I guess, like a lot of irrational biases. There's a famous famous instance in Soviet Russia where a young, I want to say Jewish boy was so brainwashed by the Stalinist regime that he turned his whole family in. And people would have thought that Stalin would have really, really appreciated this, but he was repulsed that any young boy would turn in his family to a political regime. What else? Because he's a primatologist, he references a lot of different monkey studies, talks about to what extent we're similar to monkeys, and then also talks about a lot of the different variabilities in different types of monkeys, whereas like chimpanzees versus bonobos versus other kinds of monkeys all display different like hierarchical status games or different levels of aggression, etc., etc. He goes through at length and talks about hormones. He kind of dispels a lot of myths about hormones. He talks for a while about testosterone does not equal violence in men. That there is often a lot of testosterone in violent men, but it's correlated and not causal. It's more that testosterone makes you hyper competent, maybe not hyper competent. Testosterone makes you more competent and allows you to carry out whatever action that you may want to carry out culturally. It seems that a lot of the scientific literature has moved towards pointing a lot of the blame of like emotional distress or violence towards oxytocin, and I believe vasopressin was the other hormone. They've moved away from having any kind of causal linkage to testosterone or estrogen, which is like those hormones are kind of a hot button things to touch on because they divide the sexes. What else? He takes a very I guess liberal political stance in most things, and the implication of most of these arguments is that random chance genetics or environment are going to influence the decisions you make and thus the life that you live a lot more than your personal freedom of choice or will, which scientifically I think makes a lot of sense to argue. Practically, I'm a little resistant to that personally. I could understand on a political level why you would maybe want to fix for some of those issues though, but I think often people kind of want a universal philosophy in a lot of these things, and I think paradoxically a lot of times your personal philosophy should basically be in direct conflict with your overarching political philosophy, which I think a lot of people find it hard to exist in that paradox, but that seems to be the most logical to me. It was a super interesting book. Even though I really enjoyed it, I found it incredibly exhausting. I was not wanting to return to it, even though every time I returned to it, I was getting a lot out of it, which is a pretty rare occurrence for me, I'd say. I can usually do pretty dense books, but this one really wore me down. So yeah, I would recommend getting it. I'd recommend listening to it on Audible, like I did. And I would just listen in 1 hour chunks, maybe while you're walking or driving in the car. But yeah, Robert Sapolsky, Stanford neurobiologist. Shout out Huberman, who's also a Stanford neurobiologist. Clearly got a great department over there in Palo Alto. Thank you.